Jim Hobbs and the McIntyre Powder Project. From 1943 to 1979, at least 42,000 workers in mines and factories globally were subjected by their employers to mandatory aluminum inhalation treatments known as McIntyre powder. The finely ground aluminum dust was developed at McIntyre Mine as a means of preventing the lung disease silicosis and to reduce compensation costs after silicosis became recognized as an occupational disease in Ontario, Canada in 1926. McIntyre powder was licensed to industries by Northern Ontario mining executives operating as the McIntyre Research Foundation. McIntyre powder did not prevent silicosis, and instead it caused harm to the workers who were made to inhale it. My father, Jim Hobbs, was one of those miners, and because of him, I started the McIntyre Powder Project. The project documents health issues in McIntyre powder exposed mine workers using a voluntary registry. As more and more miners were added to the registry with more and more health issues, allies and occupational health experts joined to help investigate the health effects of McIntyre powder. Journalists shone a spotlight on the human cost of aluminum inhalation and the barriers posed by the workers' compensation system. The most significant barriers were a lack of formal research into the health effects of McIntyre powder and a 20-year-old WSIB policy that automatically denied WSIB claims for neurological conditions related to occupational aluminum exposure. With persistent effort and awareness, a formal study was conducted that confirmed higher rates of Parkinson's in McIntyre powder exposed mine workers. In 2022, McIntyre powder related Parkinson's was formally recognized as a presumptive occupational disease, and the province of Ontario officially apologized to the McIntyre Powder Project miners and their families. That is the very short version of a very long and exhausting fight for justice. If you really want to understand the McIntyre powder fight, then you need to know who my father was. James Johnson Hobbs was the fourth child and eldest son of Jim Hobbs Sr. and Isabel Armstrong. Jim and Isabel were married in the middle of the Great Depression, and over the next 25 years, they had 11 children. Only 9 of those children lived to have families of their own. Velma Jane died of polio at age 6, and Bob died at age 19 after being struck by a train while on weekend leave from the Army Signal Corps. The Hobbs family lived on a farm in Massey, Ontario. They were poor, and at times there was nothing to eat. I remember Dad telling me that there were days when porridge was their only meal 3 times a day. He hated porridge and never again ate it. At a very young age, Jim learned to fish and hunt and farm. He became very skilled at it because it was a way of providing food for his family. When Jim was 15 years old, his father was permanently disabled by a severe back injury while working at the Espanola Pulp and Paper Mill. Jim and his brothers took over running the farm before and after school. The following year, Jim's mother asked him to quit school to get a job and help support the family. So he did. At age 16, with a grade 10 education, Jim found a job as a driller with Geocon, building a bridge crossing the Spanish River in Massey. By age 19, Jim began working underground as a pipe fitter for Inco at Murray Mine in Sudbury, Ontario. His job interview consisted of him being weighed on a scale. He was literally a pound of flesh. 2 years later, he married his sweetheart, Elaine Burns. The following year, he quit mining for safer work after he and Elaine welcomed their first baby girl. Jim worked as a foreman at Farquhar's Dairy for 12 years, but returned to Inco in 1974 at Crane Hill Mine. By then, he was father to Charlene, Linda, Janice, and Jimmy. He wanted to make sure that each of them had an education. Mining wages enabled him to do that. In 1978, when the uranium mines in Elliott Lake were booming, Jim quit Inco and was hired at Rio Algome's Quirk 2 mine. That is where he was first exposed to McIntyre powder. It was rare for Dad to speak of any hardships or to tell us of his time underground. He hardly ever complained. He just dealt with whatever came his way and simply got on with life. He was a provider and a protector his whole life. He hated bullies and hypocrites and would stand up when needed. He worked so hard every day, and family was everything to him. He was smart and funny and competitive, and he loved to put one over on you. The kind of man you thought would live forever. Some of you worked with Jim Hobbs in the mines. Some of you are family or friends who knew him from the golf course, Whiskey Lake, or as the log sawing champion at the Massey Winter Carnival. Most of you came to know Jim Hobbs through the McIntyre Powder project, when he was in the late stages of Parkinson's. But that wasn't who he was in life. And I wanted you to know him as we did. To us, he was larger than life. Strong, solid, unshakable. When you watch a man like that get taken out by a speck of dust, you fight. You fight for him. You fight for the others. You fight for their families, for answers, for justice, for compensation. Because my dad's story is not unique. Every one of these workers has a story. Every one of them has family and friends and a life outside of work. And we want them to live that life and to finish their stories on their terms. Not because work took their health. Not because work took their lives. So when we fight for them, what we're fighting for is how their story ends. And the only way to do that is if we actively care about what happens to them. If we actively document what they are exposed to. If we actively monitor their health over their full lifetimes. If we actively invest in safe, clean working environments. Caring about workers is important, but caring without action won't change how their story ends.